Good morning and welcome to Innovaccer's International Women's Day webinar. Thanks everyone for joining, and it's such an exciting day. There's been such great activity all over Twitter and the internet, all over the globe celebrating International Women's Day, Balance for Better. And we're certainly excited here at Innovaccer. My name is Adrienne White, and I'm the Vice President for Growth Enablement here at Innovaccer, where I make sure that we have an environment of continuous learning across our different teams. I'm joined by my colleague, Joyita. Joyita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Adrienne. So I'm Joyita Mukherjee. I'm leading the learning and development with Innovaccer, and I'm going to take up the questions during the webinar and at the end of it. So if you have any questions, please make sure that you post it on the chat box, and we are going to take it up as and when it's required. Thanks.
Thank you, Joyita. Joyita is joining us from New Delhi in India, and I'm here in San Francisco. And as Joyita said, we want this to be very interactive. So please do post your questions in the chat box, and we'll be directing those to Deb, our speaker, throughout the presentation. Now, let me introduce Deb Henretta. We are so excited to have Deb. Deb is a senior and trusted advisor for Innovaccer. She's also a senior advisor for General Assembly, a technology boot camp and education company, and she currently consults with SSA and Company in New York. Deb retired in 2015 from an accomplished 30-year career at Procter & Gamble, where she departed as the global president of e-business. Deb also had a State Department appointment and served as the chair for the Business Council for Asia Pacific Economic Corporation. She spent 7 consecutive years on Fortune's U.S. and international rankings list for the 50 most powerful women in business, and she currently sits on several boards, including American Eagle, Corning, Meritage Homes Corporation, and the privately held SC Johnson. Deb will speak today as part of Innovaccer's celebration of International Women's Day, and will share her views on creating balance in the workplace with women in leadership and executive roles. Deb, take it away.
Well, thank you so much. And I am glad to be here today to join Innovaccer's International Women's Day event and to share some of my thoughts on creating balance in the workplace. Let's start by looking at a few facts on the state of women in business leadership positions. At the start of 2019, there are 28 women CEOs on the Fortune 500, up from 24 in 2018, but down from a record high of 32 in 2017. There are about 20% of women on corporate boards, slipping a bit versus last year. And this 20% is likely a bit overstated because some women, like myself, serve on multiple boards. And most relevant to many of you on the call today, according to the 2018 World Economic Forum, women held only 5% of leadership roles in technology. Now, this tech percentage sounds a bit like the percentage of women in CPG when I first started my career 35 years ago. So you might say I've walked in your shoes, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. Suffice it to say that we are not where we should be, especially when you consider that women represent 50% of the population, 50% of the workforce, and 50% of purchasers. But where there are problems, there are also great opportunities. Opportunities for progress, especially by younger generations of women who are coming up through the ranks, and that's really exciting. And we're also seeing good progress for women in middle and entry-level management positions and in politics. Just look at how many more women are in Congress following the 2018 elections. But to make real progress, everyone has to play a role in getting to a more inclusive workplace. From grassroots activism to world political and not-for-profit efforts to shareholder watchdog groups, and more recently to institutional investors and asset managers who are calling for more progress on diversity, particularly at the board and top management levels. with some firms even withholding investment funding and demanding board seats when companies are not making the diversity progress they should. These are certainly positive steps that weren't around when I first entered the workforce 30 years ago. So where do we go from here? Well, first and foremost, what we need is a steady stream of a new breed of leaders who are equipped and ready to deal with today's challenges. Now, over my 35-year career, I've had the opportunity to work with many great leaders, but I've also had the opportunity to observe some not so good leaders. Through these observations, I've come to realize that the greatest of all leaders are those who make a significant and positive impact on their world, a task that is increasingly difficult to do in today's dynamic and volatile world. A world where change is a constant in life and the pace is accelerating, where we are becoming a younger society as we are becoming older, where we are urbanizing while we're globalizing, and while we're experiencing life in lightning speed through innovations and improvements in technology, where we communicate digitally, mobilely, socially, 24/7, and where we're innovating at a pace never before seen in history. So all this change can be exciting, but it's also challenging, and it comes at a huge cost. Pressures on the environment, growing energy demands, and growing pressures for profits. Demands on leaders in every field are greater and far more challenging than ever before. This shifting world calls for a new type of leader, people who can effectively lead in these uncertain and fast-changing times. These changing times call for what I describe as leaders of consequence. Leaders of consequence possess three critical skills: competency, character, and courage. And these are the things that help them have a powerful, positive impact. Competency to do great things, character to do right things, and courage to do great, right things. It's the courage to do great, right things which so clearly separates the good from the bad and defines the greatest of leaders. I want to quickly talk about each of these characteristics, and I'm going to try to assess what I have observed as how well women, and this will be generally speaking, how well women fare in each of these important areas. So leaders need to be competent. And I'm sure competency sounds pretty basic to you all. And many of you might be thinking right now, oh, I've got that one covered. I'm smart, I know how to do things, I'm a good leader. But the competencies that are needed today are really different than that which is needed in the past. Sure, everyone is going to need competencies in some of the tried and true leadership skill areas like visioning, inspiring and empowering people, building capability, excellence and execution. But leadership skills of the past are no longer going to be sufficient for the future. Leaders of consequence know that they must enhance competencies to keep pace with fast-changing times and technologies. It's no longer possible to apply yesterday's solutions to today's problems. Today, we're seeing a pace of change that's never been faster. But years from now, we'll look back and say that the pace of change was never slower. Even younger generations, who are today seen as the digital natives, many of you all are probably amongst those digital natives, you're going to find that you too have to change and adjust to even newer technologies that are often occurring on the fringes of industries. So today's leaders need to be forward-looking. They need to have transformational visions to keep pace with the digital and technology change. They need to quickly, and I emphasize quickly, imagine what's possible, inspire 5 generations of workers. As of 2020, we will have 5 generations of workers in the workplace, and then implement their plans to make their vision a reality. They've got to be fast, agile, and open to new ideas and approaches. Leaders have to be digitally and technically proficient. Now notice that I said proficient, not expert. You don't need to know everything about everything, but you do need enough to be able to lead your company or your division or your organization to a new future. And this skill area, being proficient in digital and technological change, is going to give leaders the upper hand to get to the top leadership positions in the future world we're barreling towards. And finally, leaders need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's because of the uncertainty that exists in the world today. Leaders have to be able to look around corners, anticipate changes, consider how technology can be used to do whatever they do better, faster, and cheaper. Now, through a woman's lens, I have to say that I've not experienced many differences in competencies for women or between women and men. But I will tell you that I do see different levels of confidence and how we view those competencies. And let me share a little bit about that. You know, I've seen a lot of bosses evaluate men and rate men and promote men based on their potential. But for women, they base those ratings and those promotions on proven results. And to be honest, you can't put all of this at the feet of male bosses, because I've watched female bosses do the same. The other piece to this is that women themselves own part of this, because they often don't raise their hand at the point at which they're showing potential to do the next job, and instead wait till they've seen proven results, and often proven results over time. Our male counterparts, on the other hand, are often willing to raise their hand the minute they feel like they are ready or they've started to show potential for a new job. The other thing I've observed about women is sometimes when women are offered very stretching or very challenging jobs, they turn them down. And that can't be the case going forward. So the one little bit of advice I have to you all about the competencies that you need to show is when you feel like you're getting ready for additional responsibilities, for broader assignments, make sure you raise your hand and let your bosses know that you're feeling ready, or at least that you're interested in it. And when you're offered those opportunities, make sure that you raise your hand and take them. So that's just a little bit on kind of where I see on the competency issue. Again, it's not that women are less competent than men. I think sometimes there's this issue of proven results versus potential, and it exists both with the bosses, but also with women ourselves. The next thing that we're going to talk about is what I call the executive presence factor. So, and this is another area of opportunity that I see for women. Competence and executive presence are very interconnected. Executive presence include things like competence, character, and courage, but it also picks up things like care of individuals, care of employees, confidence, and connectability. And confidence and connectability are places where they can be problematic for women. Now, what do I mean by confidence? Confidence is the ability to lead and speak with conviction, to command the room, to control your emotions, to stay poised under pressure. And sometimes women struggle with confidence, either as a real deficit or as a perception of confidence by others. Now, this is something that can be overcome with focus, with time, and yes, with practice. I will share with you all that I had a boss pretty early on in my career who told me that I had the confidence level of an ant. And that's not talking about like your Aunt Mary. We're talking the ant insect. And to build my confidence here, she threw me into speaking engagements and often gave me the reins to run high-profile meetings. Now, early on, this made me highly anxious and often felt like I was going to pass out. But over time, these experiences gave me the confidence that I needed. And today, 30 years later, I'm a very confident speaker, and I actually enjoy speaking, which is a long way from where I was when I first started out in my career. The second executive presence problem area for women is sometimes connectability. It's the ability to listen, to interact, and engage, to be open to feedback and new ideas, and it's also the ease with which you can connect and network with others. I hear from women that they are less comfortable in this area than their male counterparts. I know I was. I now admit to being one of the worst networkers on the planet for most of my career. It wasn't until I went to Asia, and then when I left P&G, that I began to develop my networking skills. And I'm now a very good networker, and I have incredible connections, all because I was forced to get out of my comfort zone. So one of the things that you can do as it relates to this connectability issue is to put yourself out in places where you have the ability to network, to meet other people from different industries, different walks of life, different functions, because that will help you grow as a leader. And then the final point here is I will say that women almost always, or I shouldn't say almost always, women can get a bad rap for listening. For some reason, women are talkers. We think and problem solve through talking. And that's one thing we do have to watch, because in a world where, there is this more diverse environment, we have to learn to be as good at listening and taking in the ideas and feedback of others as we are about talking and providing ideas and feedback to others. Okay, if we now move to the second quality of a leader of consequence, it's character. And if competency is all about skills, character is about attitude and integrity. Leaders need a strong moral compass to guide them through the labyrinth of complexities and volatilities in today's challenging workplace environments. And that just isn't happening today. Just look at the graveyard of fallen leaders in business, in sports, in entertainment, and in politics. Today, leaders have much less certainty and control than they've had in the past. This is where character becomes more important than ever. Bottom line, character is about doing the right thing. It's about having an unwavering commitment to the principles of truth and integrity. It's about being fair and taking care of your employees, your customers, and other key stakeholders. Now, finally, leaders of consequence need courage. And I'm not talking about the kind of courage in a conventional sense of the word, like a firefighter running into a burning building to save people. I'm talking about a different kind of courage. I'm talking about a courage to create, a courage to change, and a courage to innovate. I'm talking about a courage as the strength in the face of difficulty or uncertainty. And I'm talking about the courage to challenge conventional ways of doing things and reimagine a different and better way. As I look at my career, it was one big lesson in courage. And it will take increasingly more courage to lead in today's world. The stakes are higher, the risks are greater. Courage is an area where I see women, generally speaking, of course, have much to learn. Women are not always comfortable in taking risks. They tend to be a bit more cautious in their business plans and their actions. And we have to overcome this if we want to emerge as top leaders. Courage takes on two forms: courage to consider and courage to change. Courage to consider is that which you need to open up new doors and to think about new possibilities. There's so many possibilities out there if you can muster up the courage to try, if you can accept that you don't have all the answers, and you're willing to accept new challenges. For me, courage took on a lot of different aspects, but I'm going to talk about two to illustrate the point here. It took me a lot of courage to move to Asia and run a very large, complex business in a region of the world that was very much a man's world. At the time, Asia wasn't a growth engine that it is today, and P&G had a very small and fragmented businesses. I was really comfortable in my job. At the time, I was working in the baby care business, and I had been in a decade-long decline. I had just turned the business around to growth, and I was really excited about the possibilities of continuing with that business. And now all of a sudden, the company is asking me to leave a growing $15 billion business to fly halfway around the world to run an Asia business, which was a tiny $1 billion business. That certainly was not the big promotion I thought I had earned by turning around the baby care business. So much so that I almost turned down the assignment. This move required courage to leave the comfort of my home country, to leave my parents, to leave my friends, and to pick up and move my young family halfway around the world. And it required learning and dealing with a complex region. Asia's vast diversity creates several paradoxes that coexist. Asia houses some of the world's richest and the poorest, with people making, well into the $100,000 living alongside people that make less than $1 a day. Change is happening so fast in Asia that whole generations of products are being skipped, where leapfrogging is the norm. And a lot of this rapid industrialization and resulting climate change were increasing the frequency of natural disasters, made tougher by the lack of infrastructure in Asia. Add a bit of political and social unrest, growing gaps between haves and have-nots, a little bit of terrorism every now and you have potential for crisis. And yet, it was the best, most fantastic experience for me and for my family. And Asia opened up new doors for me, giving me the chance to contribute beyond P&G. I was invited to serve on Singapore's Economic Development Board. Think of this as a board of directors that runs the country of Singapore. And there I was able to work firsthand with the Prime Minister of Singapore in the development of a 10-year growth plan for the country. I also received a State Department appointment to the Business Council of APEC, one of Asia's premier economic forums. I was appointed as the first female chair of the 21 Country Advisory Council, allowing me the opportunity to work with 21 heads of state, including President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. I never would have been afforded this opportunity if I hadn't had the courage to get out of my comfort zone and consider an assignment in Asia. And I had to be really pushed by my management to take the Asia assignment, and yet it proved to be the greatest career and life experience. I know I'm not the only one to be nervous about considering these kinds of big and out of your comfort zone assignments. So I encourage you, when these doors open, don't just walk through the door, run towards the opportunity if you have the chance. And then I want to say a little bit about the courage to change. This is the second component of courage that I want to talk about, and it requires that you identify and lead change you want to see. It requires the ability to embrace change, not hide from it. Change agents seize moments of possibility or tension to create something new and better. We've watched companies like Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, and I would say even Innovaccer create and shape the world that we're living in today. But there's new innovators of tomorrow who are already creating new concepts on the edges of these businesses. I just came back from Shop Talk in Las Vegas, which is a conference for retail, and looking at what's new and coming up. And I'm looking at ideas like a drive-through supermarket and other new exciting health tech startups that are tackling home health diagnostics and treatments, fully autonomous transportation, space travel, and more. And it's going to be fun to see all these innovations that we can't even conceive of today as they start working their way into conversation in the marketplace. Some of these inventions are going to bring big improvements, while still others are going to create significant problems. But all of this adds up to great opportunity, and it provides a great platform for leaders of consequence to emerge. More than once, I've been asked and called upon to lead a big change. As you heard, I was asked to move to the baby care business and ran that for a while. But what I didn't talk about is when I picked up the baby care business, it was in a serious 10-year decline, with our flagship Pampers brand having just lost market share leadership to our key competitor Huggies. And it was clear that the business needed help fast. It only took a few meetings to realize that engineering was running the show. I remember sitting in one of my first product reviews and seeing some of our diapers for the first time. They wanted me to see how great their technology was, but all I could see were these ugly bears hanging from parachutes. And it takes a lot of talent to define and draw an ugly bear. And when I asked the scientists what the meaning of the bear with parachutes were, they said to me, well, Deb, of course it signals protection from wetness. And I thought to myself, okay, there's a lot of things I do to protect myself from wetness. Like I might grab an umbrella and take that outside if I think there's a chance of rain. But never in my life have I considered a parachute as something to protect you from wetness. And again, combine that with the ugly bears, and I was just failing to see what we were trying to sell to moms. So I knew that we had to get to something better. And so we created a rallying cry that we had to get out of the factory and get back into the nursery so that we could turn around this business by appealing to what moms really wanted out of a diaper. So we completely revamped everything about the brand, giving it a new, more modern feel, a new logo, a new design to the package, as well as lots of improvements to the diaper itself, and ultimately replacing those ugly parachuting bears with more lovable Sesame Street characters like Elmo and Big Bird. But we didn't stop there. Our insights and learning on baby development gave us inspiration to design a line of products that changed as babies grew and developed. This idea was intuitive to moms as she already experienced it in other baby categories. Babies graduated from bottles to sippy cups, from baby cereals to solid foods. And in the process, we designed a new advertising campaign, Learnings from Babies, which summed up with the selling line, Inspired by Babies, Created by Pampers. This drove the business from a 10-year decline to phenomenal growth, adding $2 billion of sales in just 2 years' time. Now, sometimes you're afforded the opportunity to make changes that have impacts beyond the business, opportunities to make a positive impact for your people, your customers, and to do your part for the planet. With so many pressures on our economies, and our environment, it's important that leaders positively impact your organization and the communities in which you live. This push is becoming more responsive and attentive corporate citizens. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's quickly becoming a must-do. Led by shareholder watchdog groups and investor groups like BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager with nearly $6 trillion in assets, these companies are pushing for establishment of stretching goals, clear metrics against which progress can be regularly assessed. I like to think of this as a push for profits with a purpose. At P&G, we were early leaders in this drive, driven by our mission to improve the lives of the world's consumers. And I've always looked for ways to strategically link my business growth to charitable giving. And just to share a few examples, in Asia, we developed a holistic Live, Learn, and Thrive program. One part was focused on the water program to eliminate the deaths of 1.6 million children who die each year from unclean water. With the help of UNICEF and the World Health Organization, we provided more than 1 billion liters of safe drinking water to children around the world. When I was in baby care, we partnered with UNICEF and started a vaccination program designed to eliminate neonatal tetanus. Today, P&G has vaccinated tens of thousands of moms and babies in an effort to help end this disease. Now, this is a place where women can excel because we are often in tune with the softer side of business and the softer side of life. So each of you have the opportunity to rise up to this new standard of leadership. I already see Innovaccer management and so many of the bright young talents I come into contact with rising to this challenge. But bottom line, we need you, each of you, to be a leader of consequence with competence to make great things happen, character to make right things happen, and courage to make great right things happen and lead the way to a brighter future. So now that covers the leadership angle, and I hope that I've shared a few places where I think women have the opportunity to step up or rise up and really take a bigger, stronger leadership position. But there's things that need to happen in corporations beyond just the leadership aspect. So what can organizations do to help? And as you get into leadership positions, as you get asked by your managements what can be done to create more inclusive environments, I'd give you 4 suggestions. First, we have to make sure our companies and our business units have clear strategic focus and metrics. Second, we need to have regular training on unconscious bias. We all do things that have some element of bias, and we're learning to recognize those behaviors will help all of us become more inclusive. And we need to work to give women more exposure and opportunities, particularly to the big jobs and challenging assignments. Sheryl Sandberg talks a lot about having women lean in. But I see an even bigger opportunity is having companies lean in on their talented women. Lean in on the training, lean in on the support and mentoring that women need to succeed in very challenging leadership roles during very challenging times. Really quickly, what's getting in the way? Well, it's kind of the inverse of some of the actions I just talked about. What gets in the way are legacy systems, structures, and expectations. What gets in the way is a lack of rigorous focus and metrics. What gets in the way is a lack of opportunity and exposure. And quite honestly, what gets in the way is a fear of displacement by those people who occupy the top roles. Many of these obstacles do get addressed in the actions that we just talked. And then finally, I wanted to just say a few words on what women can do to help. Okay? First, as we can and as we get the opportunity, let's give women a seat at the table. Let's get them involved in the discussion. Let's get them into big meetings where they can share their insights and share their leadership skills. Let's make sure that we help and support them, not just with business issues, but with life issues. I remember, really kind of midpoint of my career at Procter & Gamble, we were all, the women that were there, and there weren't many of us, but we're all starting to have children, and we were really stressed out, trying to juggle these big jobs and juggle having children. And I remember one day a boss of mine called me up and she said, you know what, Deb, I absolutely can't pick up my kids tonight. I'm doing something and my partner is doing something else and neither one of us can get out of it and daycare closes at 6 o'clock. Would you mind picking my kids up that night? And I thought to myself, wow, there have been so many times when I've needed help like that and I didn't reach out. And here my boss was reaching out to me looking for some help. And by the very act of her reaching out, it made it okay for me the next time to say, hey, I've got an issue. Might you be able to help me out? So think about help and support beyond just help and support you can provide to women at work. Are there things that you can help them every now and again outside of work, and in return, they might be willing to help you out when you're in a bind? And then we need to mentor and coach, particularly the younger women, and especially younger women that you might see struggling. I find a lot of times the brightest talent gets all the mentoring and coaching, and they probably are the people who need it the least. So I try often to look at, are there people that look like they're struggling a bit? Are there people that look like they're not being included or not finding their way into the right exposure in meetings? Those are the people who can really use your help, because often they're the diamonds in the rough. They just need a little bit of confidence, a little bit of support to give them, a path to success. And then finally, as you get into positions at the managerial levels, do what I like to describe as lift as you climb. Make sure that you're identifying and pulling along the next generation of strong, talented female leaders and help get them the promotions and the positions of power that they will need to be able to make a positive impact in their world. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if folks have any questions on what we've talked about so far, or any other questions as it relates to, trying to get and build a more inclusive environment in the workplace.
Thanks, Deb. That was very interesting. And while Joyita is gathering the questions from the audience, I thought I'd start with a question for you. So we've seen on the international stage some countries that have implemented regulations around having mandatory board seats for women to kind of balance board of directorships for women and men. And I was curious if you think it's important to have a balance of genders on boards, and why do you think that's important?
Okay, let's start. We'll take a couple of pieces on this. I think it's critically important that we eventually work towards better representation of women on boards and in managerial positions, in top leadership positions. And this is across industries, across, all walks of life. And I think it's important because it represents, as I said, half of the population, half of the workforce, and half of the consuming public. I'm very aware and watching very carefully some of the moves that are being made, particularly in Europe and in some places in Asia, on getting a little bit more to a quota system. And I'll tell you, my gut says I'd rather get there without quotas, but it may come to a point where that's what we need to make, real and substantial progress. And I'll tell you why I'm a little bit hesitant on quotas, because I think if you force people to take a minority group onto a board, and they then feel under great pressure to get that minority represented on a board. My worry is that they either lower the standard or that they, kind of push people onto a board who aren't ready. And then when they don't succeed in those board seats, we're going to have a backlash of, I told you so, or I tried women and it didn't work. So I think it's really important that we keep the standard absolutely high and the same for men, women, for people of different culture, for young people and old people. I think it's really, really important to keep the standard high. And I'd like to do it by self-policing, by having the shareholder watchdog groups, by having institutional investors start to say, we're not going to invest in your company if you don't have a diverse profile, because then you make it important to the business strategy and the leaders that are having to make those changes, and you don't give them as much of an out as you forced my hand by putting a government quota on the gender representation or cultural representation for that matter. But again, we're watching it very closely, and I will tell you, some of these government-backed quota systems are showing some good progress. And if we can't make voluntary progress in the business world in the countries that don't have quotas, I think it's something we'll have to consider.
Okay, thank you. Joyita, would you like to read one of the questions from the audience?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Adrienne and Deb. That was a very insightful presentation. And we have a lot of questions which are pouring in. And I would also request everybody else to please share your questions on the chat box. Well, the first question which has come in is a very interesting one. And it says that what advice would you give women trying to become leaders and executives in a male-dominated technology startup? And how is their journey going to be different from that of a male colleague?
Great question. And again, I try to root all things in sort of the leadership model, because I think that helps us stay very clear on what needs to happen in terms of getting people qualified, experienced, and knowledgeable enough to move into these big positions. What I will say, and I kind of probably breezed over this in my opening comments, that the world that you all, women in tech, live in right now, very male dominated, less than 5% of tech leadership positions being filled by women. It's really not that different from where I entered the consumer packaged good industry 35 years ago, okay? So when I was fresh out of college, there were lots of women working in CPG, and for those of you who aren't familiar with my acronym there, that's the consumer packaged goods industry. The P&Gs, Johnson & Johnson, Kraft food type companies, all lumped together. When we came in, there were actually a lot of women in the ranks, which is a little different than the tech situation, but there were very, very few women in the top leadership positions and even fewer women on the boards. And so, some of the leadership model and the way that I think about this notion of leaders of consequence, I've tried to reflect on the things that I saw women who were successful in that very male-dominated world. I've tried to collect those and put that into that leadership model. What men need to see in these male-dominated worlds are women who emerge as competent, and that includes that executive present component that I talked about, women who have high character, who can be trusted, and women who are courageous. And as we talk, that's something that women are a little bit more shy about coming forth with their ideas and actively pushing maybe more risky visions and plans that they have than I have perceived the male counterparts pushing. So, the one thing that I will say is it's completely hard. It's really, really hard to be a minority, any minority, whether we're talking about a person of color, whether we're talking about a woman, whether we're talking about young, brilliant leaders who are finding their ways onto established boards. They are very much a minority in that boardroom. These are all very, very hard situations. And that's why I tried to really spend some time emphasizing courage, because I really do think it all boils down to opportunity, exposure, and courage. Okay. So what management has to do is provide the opportunity and the exposure. And if they don't do it, you got to push for it yourself. But then there's that other component of you have to have the courage to take those opportunities, or maybe even ask for those opportunities, so that you have so that you have the chance to show your thinking, your brilliance, and your ability to deliver results for the entity. But it is hard, and I don't, mean in my comments to belittle that or to imply that any of the concepts I've put out before you are easy to do. They're not. The one other thing that I can say is networking, mentoring, coaching are all important ways for you to get past that feeling of being alone or being a minority. And, as I pointed out, I was a horrible, horrible networker when I first started out. And if I could go back and do one thing different and better about my career, and I had a fabulous career and feel like I'm still having a fabulous career. But if I could do one thing better, I would have networked. I would have reached out for more coaching, for more training, for more support, because I would have learned faster, and I would have learned with making fewer mistakes. One of the things women like myself who've got 30, 40, 50 years in business, one of the things we can help out with is we can help you understand the mistakes that we made, understand the things that we would have done better and different, because you shouldn't have to make the same mistakes that we made. We should have been trailblazing for you and plowing the way a little bit. And the only way we can do that is by, helping and reaching out and mentoring. And there's a lot of really good forums that people need to start thinking about. There is a women's leadership acceleration program that's put on by the G100 company, and it's outstanding. Now, it's only for people that are, either looking towards or about to get a C-suite level position. But it's a phenomenal organization that gives you the training where women like myself sit for 3 days and talk about, here's the mistakes we've made, here's the things that we did right, here's the opportunities, here's how to do it. So again, you don't have to be on your own, but you've got to reach out. You've got to find your way to these exceptional forums. You've got to do reading. I mean, Google, what do you do? How can a woman survive in a man's world? You'll get a ton of different people's perspectives. Not all of those perspectives will work for you, but you'll be able to take bits and pieces of a lot of people's thinking on this, and you'll be able to put something together that works for you. So those are my thoughts on, how to move forward.
Great. Those were some very great insights from Deb. Well, the next question that we have is, and I know that some of it you've already covered in your presentation. So it says, have you have ever encountered a male bias in your workplace? If you could share one example, and how do you advise dealing with this without hampering relationships and advancement opportunities?
Well, of course, I've encountered male bias. Okay, you can't start in a world, as many of you are dealing with in tech, where you're such a small minority without having some, bias, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And I think at least when I was coming up through the ranks, there was both intentional bias and unintentional bias. Um, and I don't know too many women in the workforce even today that don't occasionally encounter some sort of bias. But I'll tell you that there's lots of men out there that also experience bias, unconscious and otherwise. So women aren't the only victims. Um, when I was coming up through the ranks, there just weren't very many women. And so, like I said, it just parallels the tech situation. And when you think about it, bias is really about divisiveness and advantage, right? And what we need to do is get beyond that divisiveness, and that's why I don't like the word diversity. And if you've noticed, I've really tried to use the word inclusion, because I think the word diversity, it comes from a basis of dividing, and it creates a world where you almost feel like there's got to be haves and have-nots. As I get advantage, you lose advantage. And I don't think that that's what we really are striving for. I think what we're really trying to do is to include other backgrounds and cultures and genders, because what we know is homogeneous groups of people don't come up with as clever, as creative, or as successful ideas as groups that have different perspectives, different experiences in them. So what are some suggestions that I have on this? I always try to not get caught up in that divisiveness. What I try to do is focus on the business outcome and not the approach. One thing you'll find is when you get the results, you will earn respect and you'll earn opportunities. The second advice that I have for you is speak up. Women don't always speak up when they disagree. Women don't always speak up when they see other opportunities. And sometimes women have a hard time being heard, right? Trying to get in a word in edgewise into some of these conversations where there's a comfort amongst a homogeneous group of people. So you have to find a way to speak up. And I'll give you a really silly little thing I used to use. I don't know if it'll work in the tech world or not, but we were back in the day of big meetings and long meetings, and sometimes I'd be sitting there and I just could not get a word in edgewise. And what I started to do was, when I would get frustrated, I would make a loud tap on the table. Okay? Like maybe you heard that. I just tried to tap, right? And it's amazing what a little tap can do, because everybody stops talking. They kind of look around to see what's happening, and then I jump right in with my thoughts and ideas. And I will tell you, I have given that suggestion to hundreds of different women's groups, and inevitably I have somebody from those groups who come back and go, oh my God, I tried your tap idea and it really does work. Now, in the day of digital and virtual communication, I don't know what the equivalent of a tap on the table is, but if you can figure that out, that's one helpful suggestion. The other thing that I used to do is I used to get very frustrated by men taking credit for my ideas. So I would sit in these rooms with men and I would say something that I thought was pretty smart, and clearly it was pretty smart, because the next thing I know, someone is repeating exactly what I said and getting credit for the idea. So what I started doing was I started taking responsibility for summarizing meetings. And I would summarize meetings in ways that gave due credit to individuals for the ideas that they contributed to the meeting. And in that way, I could control the memory and the historical record of the meeting, such that I made sure I got credit for my ideas, but I was also very careful to make sure that I gave due credit to others who had good ideas in those meetings as well. It's taking on a little bit of extra work, but I found it extremely helpful. And then 3 months, 4 months, 3 years later, when someone went to credit the idea, you had that documentation and a formal summary that noted who came up with the idea for whatever it was. Another suggestion that I have is, just accept that life is not fair and don't whine and cry about it. You got to turn missed opportunities into learnings, and you got to turn disappointments into opportunities, and you just got to move on. When life or work isn't fair, you got to step back and say, what can I learn from that? Why did it turn out that way? What could I have done differently? Sort of do that, what I call after action review, and then learn from that so that you don't let it happen a second time. And then also, I'm a big believer in, you have to accept that there's consequences for the choices that you make. And, I got to tell you, I'm a big believer that when, if a woman steps out for a reasonable amount of time to have kids, she shouldn't expect to get promoted on exactly the same timing as a comparable, and notice I said comparable, rated, comparable contributing male. Now, one of the good things that you all have in today's world, as you look at that, is there's a lot of guys out there taking paternity leave. So in that world, or in this new world that we're moving forward with, that may not be as big an issue as it has been in the past, because thankfully a lot of men are saying, I don't want to miss my children, I don't want to miss the childbirth, I don't want to miss the early days of my children, for those who choose to have children. So those are a couple of thoughts. And one thing while we're on this, because I think this kind of links a little bit, that last comment, to balance. So let me talk just a few minutes about balance. And, people talk about work-life balance and wanting work-life balance, and I've got a couple of thoughts and suggestions I want to share. First of all, I am a big believer that you can have it all. You just can't have it all at the same time, okay? Or very few people can have it all at the same time. And finding balance in life, and balance also differs person to person. What I look at as good or needed balance is probably very different than what many of you think it is. So you have to define it individually. But I will tell you that no matter how you define it, juggling is part of the journey. I mean, you've just got to learn to be a very good juggler of things. And that probably even speaks to, finding good balance within your work life. But certainly as you're trying to deal with home and family, whether family is defined as taking care of elder parents, having a significant other or a partner, having children, sometimes even having a hobby, right? Finding that balance becomes really important. And, again, it's a constant balancing act. It's not easy, so don't let anybody tell you that it is. I love when I listen to women on panels and they sit up there going, oh, balance is no problem, I've got everything taken care of. And I assure you that those people are not really dealing with their life. They've got cooks who are cooking, they've got house cleaners who are cleaning, they've got au pairs and nannies who are taking care of their kids. So I don't really believe that those women are actually trying to find balance that they personally control. I have 7 tips for balance, but in the interest of time, because I want to make sure we get to some more questions. I see a lot of them coming in here. I'm just going to share 3 of them, but I have made available my full 7 tips to the event organizers, so I'm sure that they can get copies of that out to you for anybody that's interested. But my 3 big tips, so of the 7, I think 3 are more important than the others, especially for me. And the first tip is that you have to prioritize. You have to make real choices in life. And that's not just about what you're going to do, but it's equally important to make the list of what you're not going to do. And women have this incredible ability to do what I call bucketing. They can take everything they could possibly do and bucket it in to a few choices. So I'm not talking about that kind of choice making. I'm talking about having a list of things that you're going to do and having an equally long and robust things that you're not going to do. Because only if you have that list of what you're not going to do can you be assured that you're actually making real choices. The second thing is that balance is possible if you look for creative solutions. Ask for help when needed and accept help when offered. Women in general are bad at both things. We don't tend to ask for help when needed because we try to do it all and try to solve all of our own problems. And we're really lousy at accepting help when offered. And I think the example I used with my boss is a great illustration of what that concept can mean if you actually do those two things. And then the third thing is, I think balance is possible if you take a long-term view. I call this my manage the month, not the minute principle. And really what that means is, if I tried to look at my life and see if I had balance on a day or even a weekly basis, I probably fail. Because there's some days when I'm like a great mom and I've got everything done for the kids and I've made it home every night for dinner, and I'm probably behind on work. And then there's weeks where I'm really got everything nailed at work, and my guess is I've missed a dinner, or I wasn't available for, a kid who needed something, like to think I was there when they needed something urgently, but maybe, couldn't answer a text or an email as quickly as I would have liked. So I can never find balance if I look at it that way. But if I step back and look at my balance on a month or a quarter or a year, I gotta say, I feel like I have really, really good balance. I'm able to keep everything done at work and things well managed at home. But I just can't do it if I look at it on the short term. So those are my 3 big tips for balance.
Great. Okay, so we have got one question around the networking opportunities, Deb, which you spoke about. And it says, you mentioned taking advantage of networking opportunities. Do you have some specific examples that worked for you or that you see women not taking advantage of?
Okay, I would say if you want to become a better networker, take every opportunity and look for opportunities in life and in work, okay? So everything from a young business association to a young moms, support group, those can be kind of life sort of experiences that could help. Groups, where you're interacting with people from a hobby basis, but force yourself to actually meet others. Don't be the wallflower in the corner. When you go to events, when you go to social parties, force yourself to meet. I used to use as a principle, meet 3 new people at every event I've ever attended. Okay, that's 3 new contacts. They may not prove useful, but I got to tell you, some of those contacts I thought might not have been useful have come back years later and be very, very important to something that I'm working on. In the business context, I would say, join Chamber of Commerce. Join boards of not-for-profits, or even just get involved in a not-for-profit organization and use that to try to leverage yourself on a board. That will help you start to get board experience that may pay big dividends later in life when you actually might think about sitting on a corporate board or wanting to have a resume that earns you the right to sit on a corporate board. Like I said, Chamber of Commerce groups are good. Network with your own leaders. Sometimes I think people are sort of afraid of leadership. Take them to lunch, talk to them about what they're doing, talk to them about the kinds of boards that they sit on, talk to them about the kinds of networking experiences that they have, and use some of those ideas as ways to also get out there. So I think it's a matter of taking the time to identify organizations that can help you either practice or help you make important connections, making sure that while you're there, you're actually forcing yourself to meet some new people and not just talk to the folks that you already know and you're comfortable with. And then keep trying to broaden that group over time.
Great. Okay, so we are taking the last questions for this webinar. And that is, in your experience, have you ever seen emerging professional women have major blind spots? What can women do to find their blind spots to help themselves grow?
Oh, yes, I have seen people who have had major blind spots. And I think there's been a time or two in my life, in my career, when I probably had blind spots. I think the best thing that you can do is get comfortable with getting feedback. And, whether my company mandated it or whether it was part of the formal review process, I've always been big on 360 feedback, and making sure that I understand how my bosses, how my peers, and how my subordinates are viewing me. I try to do it very anonymously. If you have an HR manager at your disposal, they're good people to do it, and tell them you don't want to know who said what. What you want to know is what the content is and what you can do better, and also to get a sense of what you're doing right. And so I think that's a really critically important thing. And the way that I think about feedback, I used to not like feedback. I was when I got feedback, I was embarrassed and I felt bad, and I found myself getting a little defensive, whether or not, I tried to not let people see that defensiveness, but I would go home on the way home and talk to myself in the car about how I didn't do X, Y, or Z. But over time, and I think age and wisdom sort of sets in. Over time, I've really started to look at feedback as a gift. And I think if you put it in that context, you're more open to take that feedback. And the most important thing about feedback is actually listening to it and doing something about it. So think about it as a gift. It makes it a little less threatening. And then actually listen, internalize, and do something about it. So on that, I'm just going to close with a few closing words of wisdom, if I could. And these are things that are really important to me, and these are things I wish somebody told me at the beginning of my career. The first one is love the life you're in. Laugh hard, and laugh often. It's good for the soul, and we're now finding that it's good for your health too. Loving life means finding time for you. And for me, it's about the 3 E's: exercise, eat right, and ease up. Or better said, don't sweat the small stuff. Enjoying life requires learning to love what you have. I just find that we live in a world right now of such materialism and excess, where possessions and positions are the symbols of success. And if my experience has taught me anything, it's taught me that wealth and power are no guarantee for happiness. In fact, some of the wealthiest and most powerful people I know are also some of the loneliest. Many have worked so hard for so long that when they finally wake up to life outside of work, they find they have little else. Second thing, and final, actually second of 3 things, is to find your passion. Passion is what drives you. You have to find work that you're passionate about. And I think this is something that women have an overabundance of, and we should learn to leverage our passion. Now, sometimes we're hesitant to show or leverage the passion, and with good reason, because a woman's passion sometimes is seen through a negative filter. A lot of times people say, oh, she's too emotional, she wears her heart on her sleeve. But I believe passion is our power. It's that which positively funnels emotion. It helps us stay positive, it helps us stay persistent, and it helps us drive ourselves to make a difference. And I'm going to share 2 of my favorite quotes. The first one is on being positive, and it's by Winston Churchill. And he says, "A pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. The optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. Choose to be an optimist. Choose to be positive. Choose to make a positive impact in whatever it is that you do." On being persistent, I love this quote. It's by Michael Jordan, who's one of the greatest basketball players that have ever lived, right up there with, the modern day Michael Jordan with LeBron James. But Michael wrote once, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed." What a powerful statement from someone who is phenomenally successful and will go down probably forever as one of the greatest basketball players that ever lived. And yet he evaluates his failures and keeps on trying. And that's what he believes was an element of success. And then my final thought to you all is basically the world needs you and your leadership. And you need to find ways to harness your passion and your talents to make a difference in your world. Whether your impact is to be big or small, global or local, affecting millions or affecting one. Be a leader of consequence, with competence to make great things happen, with character to make right things happen, and with courage to make great right things happen, to lead the way to a brighter future. And with that, I thank you so much for listening to me share some of my thoughts and some of my points of wisdom on today's call.
Wow, Deb, thanks so much. This is Adrienne once again, closing up the session for today. And we're certainly so lucky to have Deb as an advisor at Innovaccer. And I think actually the planet is a better place because of your tireless advocacy for women and gender balance. So on this International Women's Day, thank you, Deb, for those inspiring words. And thanks to everyone who joined the webinar today. Have a great day.